In today's video, we're looking at 5 Karens who ignored every warning and ended up eaten alive, from a crocodile dragging one off an airboat in Florida to a leopard in Colorado showing that even cages can't guarantee safety. But first, in the deserts of Arizona, a rattlesnake turned one Karen into its prey. It was May 18, 2014, at a wildlife sanctuary just outside Tucson, Arizona. The morning had started like many others in the desert. Nothing out of the ordinary showed that the day would end badly. The sanctuary attracts families and tourists eager to see rescued wild animals up close. Most days passed without any problems, with visitors following the rules and staff maintaining safe distances between people and animals. Jody Barnes was visiting the sanctuary with her adult daughter on a Sunday morning. She was 55 years old and worked as a secretary at a small insurance office in Phoenix. The trip to Tucson was meant to be a relaxing day away from the city, something they had planned for several weeks. People who knew Jody said she could be difficult to deal with in certain situations. Neighbors remembered her from homeowner meetings where she would complain about rules not being followed properly or argue about community policies she disagreed with. She had strong opinions about how things should be done and was not afraid to speak up when she felt services were not meeting her standards. But that day, she was just another mother spending time with her daughter, looking forward to seeing the animals. When visitors entered the sanctuary, staff members told everyone the same safety rules that were required by state regulations. They said no one should lean over the barriers or step past the marked safe zones under any circumstances. This was especially important near the big cat enclosures, where warning signs were posted on every section of railing. Staff members repeated these warnings several times throughout the day and watched visitors to make sure the rules were being followed. Jody heard these instructions but didn't think much of them, as she had been to similar places before and felt comfortable around animals. The sanctuary wasn't large, covering about 5 acres of desert land surrounded by chain link fencing. The animal areas were separated by pathways made of gravel and concrete. Chain link fences surrounded each animal enclosure, and shorter barriers made of metal rails kept visitors several feet away from the main fencing. This design was meant to create 2 levels of protection between people and animals. The jaguar lived in an enclosure near the back of the sanctuary, away from the main entrance. There was a small concrete pool for the animal to cool off in during summer heat. The jaguar spent most of its time walking back and forth in its space or resting in shaded areas. Jaguars are among the most dangerous big cats in the world. They hunt by sneaking up on their prey and using their powerful jaws to deliver a killing bite. Even jaguars that have been raised in captivity from birth keep their natural hunting instincts and territorial behaviors. They live alone in the wild and see anything that comes close to their territory as either a threat or possible prey. That morning, other visitors had walked by the enclosure throughout the day without any problems. The animal had shown no signs of unusual behavior or aggression. As Jody stood near the barrier with her daughter, looking at the jaguar and taking photos with her phone, her large tote bag slipped from her shoulder. The bag hit the ground and slid across the gravel, coming to rest just beyond the metal rail that marked the safe viewing zone. A staff member nearby saw the bag fall and told her to wait, saying someone with proper equipment could retrieve it without risk. Her daughter urged her to leave it, pointing at the warning signs posted around the enclosure, but Jody brushed them off, insisting she could grab it herself. The jaguar was lying quietly in the shade, and she believed there was no real danger. She stepped up to the viewing rail and leaned over, stretching her arm toward the bag. The ground beneath her boots was loose gravel, worn smooth by years of foot traffic. As she shifted her weight to reach farther, her shoe slipped slightly. She pushed farther still, hooking her arm through the outer rail and over the narrow gap that separated visitors from the inner chain link. In that instant, her balance gave way. Her upper body tipped forward, and her arms slipped through the fencing that lined the jaguar's enclosure. The jaguar, which had been hidden in the shade and appeared to be sleeping, reacted instantly when it saw movement near its territory. Witnesses saw the animal lunge forward and its jaws closing around Jody's forearm with crushing force. The impact slammed her against the chain-link fence as she screamed, struggling to pull back. Blood began streaming down the fence as the jaguar dragged her deeper against the barrier, shaking its head violently in the way predators kill their prey. Other visitors shouted in panic, some frozen in place while others rushed to call for help and alert more staff members. The sound of screaming echoed across the quiet sanctuary. Staff members ran to the enclosure and hit the fencing with long poles, shouting loudly to drive the cat back to a safe distance. The animal resisted at first, with its jaws locked tight around Jody's arm before finally releasing its grip after several hard blows to the fence. Jody collapsed backward onto the gravel pathway, her arm torn badly and bleeding heavily from deep puncture wounds. The attack itself lasted less than a minute before the jaguar retreated to the back of its enclosure. Major arteries in her arm had been cut by the jaguar's teeth, and she slipped into shock almost immediately from blood loss. Medical reports later confirmed that she had lost consciousness within a few minutes of the attack due to severe blood loss. Her heart stopped before emergency medical crews could stabilize her condition. The cause of death was listed as blood loss from serious injuries to her arm and shoulder. County investigators came to document the site the next day. They noted worn gravel at the barrier, faded warning signs, and gaps in the enclosure design where visitors could lean too close to dangerous animals. Their report concluded that while the jaguar had acted on natural instinct, the facility had failed to provide proper secondary barriers to prevent such incidents. In Arizona, a single step too far ended in the jaw of a jaguar. But hundreds of miles away, it wasn't solid ground that failed someone. It was the dark waters of Florida. On an airboat skimming the Everglades, another Karen pushed the limits, only to meet a predator far more ancient and unforgiving. It was June 27, 2015, on the edge of the Florida Everglades. The airboat tour had started under a bright summer sun. It was the kind of day when the heat was strong and the water looked like it went on forever across the grass. Visitors got on the boat expecting a loud but safe ride through the marshes. No one thought the trip would end badly. Millie Thompson was 52 years old and lived in Colorado. She had recently stopped working after spending many years as a school administrator. She was known for fighting with lifeguards about posted rules at local pools. She was also remembered for calling animal control many times about neighbors whose dogs barked too much. On this summer weekend, she decided to go on an airboat tour and brought a small camera to take pictures of the wildlife in the Everglades. Her choice made sense. Airboat rides were a popular thing to do, and the people running them gave safety instructions before every trip. The message was said more than once: keep your arms and legs inside the boat at all times. While Florida has many alligators, the guides warned about a more dangerous problem. Non-native Nile crocodiles had been seen in the area. These reptiles had been brought in illegally years before. They were bigger and more aggressive than the local alligators. They had started breeding in the wild, making the wetlands more risky. The Everglades that day stretched wide and flat. Mangroves and small channels were everywhere, with dark water hiding beneath the surface. The airboat moved across open areas before slowing down near the trees. Dragonflies flew overhead, and the hot wind carried the smell of mud and algae. The water looked calm, but every passenger knew things were moving underneath. Nile crocodiles are considered one of the most dangerous reptiles in the world. Unlike American alligators, which often move away from humans, Nile crocodiles are bold and will take chances to attack. In Florida, only a few of these crocodiles have been officially found, but even a small number was very dangerous. During the ride, the guide pointed out birds and patches of mangroves. Several times, he told passengers to stay seated. Witnesses said Millie got restless as the boat slowed down. She stood up and complained that the operator was going too slow. She said the ride should be more exciting. Her voice was louder than the sound of the engine. Even when people asked her to sit down, she stayed standing and kept moving her arms around. As the boat moved close to the trees, Millie leaned over the side and pointed at the water. She leaned so far that her arm almost touched the water, much closer than other passengers stayed. That was all it took. Without warning, a large crocodile came up from the water. People said the splash was big and sudden. The crocodile's mouth closed around her arm and pulled hard. The attack was so swift that most people only saw fast movement before Millie was pulled into the water head first. The people on the boat were terrified. Passengers yelled loudly. Some stood up while others held their children as the water moved around them. The crocodile rolled in the water, taking Millie under. For a second, her arm came up above the water before going down again. The thrashing was loud and echoed off the trees nearby. Then there was only rough water spreading out in circles. The boat guide told everyone to sit down while he called for help on his radio. Later that day, rescue teams searched through the swamp areas. They moved slowly in the hot afternoon. They found pieces of torn clothing in the water downstream. Her body was found floating in the current. The wounds showed what had caused her death. Word about the attack spread fast to other boat tour companies in the Everglades. Many of them made their safety instructions more comprehensive. They told passengers to stay in their seats and not make quick movements. Officials connected this incident to the problem of Nile crocodiles living in Florida waters, where they do not belong. At her school in Orlando, other teachers brought flowers to the front entrance and gathered to remember her. But for the people who had been on the boat that day, certain sounds stayed with them. They remembered hearing birds over the boat motor and the sudden quiet that came over the water. These details remain clear in their memory. In Florida, the dark water hid a reptile waiting just beneath the surface. But far from the swamps and heat, another threat stalked in silence. On the frozen coast of Svalbard, a tourist strayed from safety and walked straight into the path of the Arctic's most fearsome hunter. It was August 9th, 2016. On the icy shores of Svalbard, Norway, a small group of cruise passengers had gotten off the ship for a guided trip across the frozen landscape. The quiet of the area made it feel like no one had ever been there before. But under that stillness was hidden danger. Rebecca Johnson was 49 years old and lived in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She worked in retail management at a large department store where she oversaw staff schedules and handled customer complaints. Co-workers knew her as someone who wanted things done her way and did not like being told what to do by others. Rebecca also enjoyed traveling, and she often talked about trips that took her to unusual places that most people would never visit. She had been to remote parts of Alaska, hiked in the mountains across the western United States, and taken photography tours in places like Iceland and Greenland. This summer, she booked a cruise that stopped in Svalbard as part of a 2-week Arctic expedition. She was drawn by the promise of Arctic views and the excitement of stepping on polar ice. Her decision to join the shore trip seemed normal when the cruise ship reached Svalbard. The cruise company provided armed guides with rifles, which was required by law in polar bear territory. Norwegian regulations made it illegal for tour groups to land without proper protection, and trained guides who knew how to handle dangerous wildlife encounters. Before leaving the ship, Passengers were warned many times not to walk away from the group under any circumstances. They were told to stay within sight of the guides at all times and follow all instructions immediately without question. Rebecca, however, didn't like being told what to do and had a history of ignoring rules that she thought were unnecessary. She carried a large tote bag filled with snacks, personal items, and camera equipment. She ignored advice that food should be left on the ship to avoid attracting wildlife. To her, the rules seemed like too much worry for what appeared to be an empty and safe environment. The area around them was rocky and cold. Ice and wind had worn down the land for many years. There were ridges of dark rock that came up through the white snow, and chunks of ice floated near the shore where waves had broken them apart. Birds flew above them and made noise as they looked for food. A cold wind blew as the group walked along the shore, making it hard to hear each other talk. To visitors from warmer places, the area looked empty and frozen, like a vast white desert where nothing could survive. But Svalbard is actually home to one of the largest polar bear populations in the world. The island supports about 3,000 polar bears, which often travel across the ice looking for seals and other food sources. During the summer months, when sea ice moves farther from shore, hungry bears often come closer to human settlements and landing areas. Polar bears are the biggest land meat eaters in the world. Their sense of smell is so good that they can detect food or prey from nearly a mile away, even when wind conditions are not favorable. In summer, when sea ice moves back and their normal hunting grounds become harder to reach, they often walk closer to human areas looking for any available food. Unlike many other predators, they show little fear when approaching people, especially if food is involved. On this day, the warnings were clear and repeated multiple times. Guides told passengers not to separate from the group and not to make sudden movements or loud noises. The guides carried flare guns in addition to rifles and had communication equipment to contact the ship if needed. Several people in the group saw Rebecca walk away from the main party, even though other passengers and guides shouted for her to come back. She walked toward a patch of smooth ice near the shoreline, holding her tote bag close to her body and looking around the icy shore. She had wandered too far. Other tourists took out their cameras, thinking she was just trying to get a better photograph of the landscape. But some people with binoculars noticed movement in the distance. A large, pale figure was moving across the ice toward their location. A polar bear had detected the scent from her bag and was approaching to investigate. The bear moved quickly, covering the ground faster than most people expected. It dropped down to all four legs, with its head low in a hunting position, and it ran straight toward Rebecca. The guides started shouting warnings and getting their rifles ready, but the bear was already too close. The impact knocked her to the ground. The bear held her down with its massive weight while passengers screamed in horror. Its claws tore through her heavy coat, and the fabric ripping could be heard even over the wind. The bear's head came down, and its jaws closed around her shoulder. Blood spread quickly onto the white snow as the animal shook her with enough force to cause more screams from the watching crowd. Guides fired warning shots into the air, and the sharp cracks echoed across the ice. The bear paused for a moment, then adjusted its grip and bit down again, dragging her several feet before finally backing away when more gunshots were fired directly over its head. The entire attack lasted less than 1 minute before the bear moved to a safe distance. Rebecca collapsed onto the ice, bleeding heavily from severe shoulder injuries that had cut through major blood vessels. She lost consciousness within a few minutes and died from blood loss and shock, despite attempts by the guides to stop the bleeding. Norwegian investigators later confirmed that she had walked away from the group, despite repeated warnings from the guides. Fresh bear tracks had been visible in the area earlier that morning, which staff had pointed out as a sign of danger. The official report concluded that her decision to separate from the group directly violated established safety protocols designed to prevent fatal encounters in polar bear territory. In the Arctic, one misstep meant death beneath the weight of a polar bear. But far from the ice, another visitor in France would learn the same truth, that a single broken rule can turn a controlled encounter into chaos. It was September 3rd, 2017 at a safari park outside Paris, France. The late summer sun made long shadows across the grassy areas, and cars moved slowly along the road they were supposed to follow. The park was designed to make visitors feel like they were in the wild, with predators walking around in wide spaces. The animals were separated from people only by fences and strict rules. Families came from across Europe to see lions, tigers, and other animals in settings that looked more natural than traditional zoos. That afternoon, the rules would be tested with deadly results. Rose Dubois was 43 years old and lived in Lyon. She worked as an insurance clerk at a mid-sized company, where she processed claims and took customer phone calls. Her co-worker said she did not like doing the same tasks every day and would get restless when work became routine. Friends knew her as someone who enjoyed trying new things and often looked for different activities on weekends to make her life more interesting. On this trip, she wanted to see something that wasn't part of her normal life in the city. She thought the safari park would let her get close to the animals. Staying inside a car felt limiting to her, and she said it made the experience feel too far away. The warning signs and the things staff members told visitors seemed like too much to her. She thought they were meant for people who might do dangerous things. She believed that if she was careful, getting out of the car for a short time would give her a better view without putting herself at risk. The park was large, covering several hundred acres with big enclosures that went across rolling fields. Tall grass moved in the breeze, broken up by groups of trees and shaded areas where animals rested during the hottest part of the day. The road went through the reserve, winding past enclosures for plant-eating animals like zebras and antelopes before reaching the predator section. Here, visitors drove through metal gates into restricted areas where signs were posted every few hundred feet. Tigers walked around behind fences that looked far away, but everyone knew the animals could close the gap in seconds if they had the chance. From inside the vehicle, the experience felt safe and controlled. Tigers are powerful runners and can cover ground quickly in short bursts, reaching speeds of up to 35 miles per hour. Unlike lions, which often hunt in groups, tigers work alone and prefer surprise attacks. They like to strike from hiding when prey is close enough and unaware of danger. At safari parks around the world, staff stress that visitors should never leave their vehicles, because even a brief mistake can cause an attack. That day, staff reminded visitors many times to stay inside their cars. Guides at the entrance gate gave clear warnings before cars entered the tiger section. Additional staff members were stationed at points along the route to watch for problems. Despite these reminders, Rose was restless as their car moved through the area. Witnesses later said she grew impatient and complained that her phone couldn't get a clear enough view from inside the vehicle. The windows were tinted, and she said the glass was making her photos look unclear. As their vehicle slowed near a group of trees where several tigers were resting, she opened the door and stepped out with her phone raised, determined to get the shot she wanted. Other visitors saw her almost right away. Some honked their horns, others shouted through open windows, trying to warn her to get back inside. Park staff who were monitoring the area began moving toward her location, but they were too far away to reach her quickly. The grass near the tree line moved before she could react. A tiger had been lying in the shade, almost invisible against the dry grass and fallen leaves. In seconds, it jumped forward. Witnesses described the blur of orange and black moving across the ground, covering the distance with frightening speed. Rose turned as the animal hit her, knocking her onto the dirt road. The tiger closed its jaws around her shoulder as she screamed, dragging her across the ground. Dust rose in clouds as its claws dug into her body. People inside nearby cars shouted, and some reached for their own cameras, recording parts of the attack as it happened. Her phone fell from her hand, sliding across the dirt before stopping near the vehicle she had just left. The tiger pulled her toward the grass, stopping only to adjust its grip. Rose struggled as the tiger dragged her, but the deep bite to her shoulder had already cut major blood vessels. She was losing strength very fast, her movement slowing as blood poured onto the dirt road. She stopped moving less than a minute after the first strike. When staff forced the animal back with vehicles and warning shots, Rose was motionless on the ground. She died within minutes from blood loss and injuries to her upper body. The safari road fell quiet, except for distant engines and the sound of people talking about the incident inside their cars. In France, stepping out of a vehicle left one woman defenseless against a tiger's ambush. Back in the United States, the setting was far smaller, but no less deadly. At a private collection in Colorado, a leopard proved that even behind a fence, the danger was only inches away. It was September 14, 2018, at a roadside wildlife collection outside Pueblo, Colorado. Rain had been falling through the afternoon, leaving puddles along the gravel paths and wet streaks down the old painted signs that advertised up-close encounters with exotic animals. The storm had passed by evening, but dark clouds still hung over the eastern plains. From the highway, the place looked quiet, but behind the gates, cages of predators lined the walkways. The facility had operated for more than 5 years, drawing visitors who wanted to see big cats without traveling to major zoos. For years, neighbors had questioned whether the facility was safe, complaining about the rusted fencing, the unpleasant smell that lingered after storms, and the sounds of animals at night. Local residents had called county offices multiple times about strange noises and concerns about escaped animals. That Sunday, those concerns would prove justified. Angela Davis was 55 years old and lived in Denver. She had retired early after years of working in property management, where she had overseen apartment buildings across the city. Co-workers remembered her as someone who spoke her mind and did not avoid difficult conversations with problem tenants. That weekend, she was driving south to visit family members in Trinidad for a birthday celebration. The drive usually took about 3 hours, and she had left Denver in the early afternoon. On the way, she noticed the roadside collection and decided to stop. She hadn't planned the visit, but told herself it would be a quick detour before getting back on the road. Friends later said she often made sudden choices like that, drawn to anything that looked unusual or different from her normal routine. The facility was small and weathered, covering about 3 acres of mostly flat land. Chain-link cages stood on bare, muddy ground, with some parts reinforced by extra metal bars and others bent or rusted from years of weather exposure. The recent rain had made the path slick, and water collected in low spots near the enclosures. A few other visitors walked slowly between the cages, most of them families with children who pointed at the animals and took pictures. Inside one of the larger cages, 2 leopards paced restlessly, moving back and forth along the fence line, occasionally stopping to look at the people gathered outside. Visitors stood along the outer rail, pointing quietly while staff members reminded everyone to keep back from the barriers. Leopards are solitary animals, unpredictable in their behavior and capable of leaping more than 20 feet in a single bound. Their bite force can exceed 300 pounds per square inch, strong enough to break the neck bones of large prey animals. Even in captivity, their hunting instincts remain sharp, and they can react quickly to movement or sounds that trigger their predatory responses. The facility employed only 3 staff members that day, fewer than the recommended number for safe operation. Warning signs were posted at regular intervals, but many were faded or damaged by the weather. The barriers consisted of a single chain-link fence with a waist-high rail placed about 3 feet from the cage. This design allowed visitors to get close enough for photos, but provided limited protection if someone reached through the fencing. That afternoon, staff repeated the rules to each group of visitors. Do not lean over the rail, do not touch the fences, and do not reach through the chain link under any circumstances. The warnings were printed on laminated signs and spoken aloud by workers who moved between the enclosures. But Angela, curious and unbothered by the warnings, stepped closer to the leopard cage than the other visitors. She wanted to get a better look at the animals. Witnesses said she leaned against the wet rail and reached her hand through the fence as one of the leopards came near. The animal reacted instantly to her movement, lunging forward and seizing her arms with its jaws. In an instant, the animal lunged forward with the speed and power that made leopards successful hunters. Its jaws locked around her arm just above the wrist and yanked her hard against the cage. The force of the pull slammed her body against the chain-link fence. Screams cut across the path as other visitors realized what was happening. The leopard shook its head violently, a motion that predators use to break the necks of prey animals. Blood began streaming down the metal bars of the cage. Staff members ran toward the enclosure and managed to drive the leopard back with long poles after several strikes against the fence. The animal released its grip and moved to the back of the cage, but the damage was already done. Angela collapsed immediately, her arm torn beyond repair. Witnesses described her body shaking briefly before she went still, blood pooling fast across the wet gravel. The staff tried to help by pressing on the wound with their jackets, but the bleeding was too severe. The injuries had cut through major arteries and veins, causing blood loss that could not be stopped without immediate surgery. She lost consciousness within 3 minutes of the attack due to massive blood loss. Severe arterial damage to her forearm and shoulder caused her heart to stop. Colorado officials launched an immediate review of the facility. Inspectors cited the collection for inadequate barriers and failure to maintain proper visitor distance. The enclosure remained closed, and new regulations were drafted requiring reinforced fencing and wider setback zones for predators. Thanks for tuning in. If you're ready for more, the next story is waiting on the end screen. Another step deeper into the shadows of Animal Quest.